just outside a mid-sized East Coast city. Tree-lined streets, identical beige houses, perfect lawns, artificial lake in the center that glowed gold at sunset. On paper, it looked like peace. In reality, it was control disguised as community, and the person holding the leash was a woman named Victoria Hale. This is outrageous! You can't just ignore this!
I have done nothing wrong.
President,
Lies! We all saw it!
Always dressed like she was heading to a corporate board meeting instead of a mailbox inspection. Pearl, earrings, structured blazer, clipboard permanently attached to her hand like it was a weapon. People smiled when she walked by, but their shoulders tightened. I didn't notice it at first. I'd spent years in cramped city apartments with sirens, thin walls, and neighbors who thought 2 a.m. was karaoke hour. Maple Ridge felt like paradise. I set up my home office, installed fiber internet, and finally had the quiet I needed to focus. For the first month, everything was fine. Then the letters started. First warning, my trash bin lid wasn't fully closed in a manner consistent with community aesthetic standards. Second, my mailbox red flag was non-regulation shade. Third, my front porch light was cool
This
white
is outrageous! You can't just
HOA
ignore this!
warm white.
I have done nothing
Each
wrong.
letter was signed
Lies!
by
We all
Victoria.
saw it!
Hail, President. I complied with the first two, rolled my eyes at the third and ignored it. That was my first mistake, because Victoria didn't ignore anything. She began doing slow walks past my house, clipboard in hand, pausing just long enough to make sure I saw her writing something down. One evening, she knocked. When I opened the door, she didn't smile. "Mr. Reed," she said, "you failed to respond to 3 compliance notices." I responded to 2, I corrected calmly. "The porch light isn't in the bylaws." She tilted her head slightly. "Everything that affects visual harmony is in the bylaws." "Read them," I replied. "Section 8 covers structural changes, not light temperature." Her lips tightened. I had done the one thing people in Maple Ridge didn't do. I challenged her. "You'll receive an updated notice," she said coldly. "We expect cooperation in this community."
This is outrageous! You can't just
then she
ignore this!
That
I
was
have
the
done
moment
nothing
something
wrong.
shifted.
Lies! We all
After
saw
that,
it!
my internet started acting strange. I'd be in the middle of a client call, frozen screen, uploading a report, connection dropped, First, I blamed the provider, restarted the modem, checked the cables, then I logged into my router dashboard. That's when I saw it. A device labeled MR Community Node Connected, transferring data, hundreds of megabytes per day. I frowned. I hadn't set up any community node. I checked the MAC address logs. It had been connected for weeks, not just connected, actively routing traffic. That's when the cybersecurity part of my brain kicked in. Someone was piggybacking on my network. Ran deeper diagnostics. The traffic wasn't random, it was structured. Encrypted packets being sent to an internal IP address that didn't belong to me. The label updated every few minutes. MR Cam Hub 01, MR Cam Hub 02, MR Admin, Link Cam Hub. My stomach tightened. I didn't panic. I did what any rational person would do. I changed the password. Strong, unique, 20 characters, multi-factor authentication enabled. Then, because I have a petty streak, I renamed my Wi-Fi network. Get your own internet. I laughed to myself and went back to work. By noon, someone was pounding on my door. Not knocking. Pounding. I opened it. Victoria stood there, face flushed, clipboard clutched so tightly her knuckles were white. "What did you do?" she demanded. "Good afternoon to you too," I said evenly. "You disrupted the community security grid. I'm sorry." "The what?" "Our surveillance cameras went offline at 11:08 a.m., she snapped, "immediately after you tampered. With your router." I stared at her. "My router is private property." "It's part of shared infrastructure," she shot back. "No, it isn't." She flipped through her binder aggressively. Section 12C, Cooperative Utilities Contribution. "That's about irrigation and snow removal," I said. "Not my bandwidth." Her eyes narrowed. "You were contributing signal strength to the Maple Ridge safety network." I was doing no such thing. "You were for months." There it was. An admission. "You've been using my internet?" I asked slowly. "For community protection? Without permission?" "You live here," she said as if that answered. "Everything." I folded my arms. "You connected surveillance equipment to my private network without consent." She didn't deny it. Instead, she went nuclear. "If you refuse to restore access immediately," she said, voice shaking with rage, "I will contact law enforcement and report digital interference." I blinked. "You're going to call 911 because I changed my Wi-Fi password?" "Yes." She pulled out her phone, and she actually did it. I could hear her through the open doorway. "Yes, officer, I need assistance. A resident has compromised our community surveillance system and may be interfering with communications infrastructure." I laughed, until I heard sirens. Within 10 minutes, 2 police vehicles rolled into Maple Ridge Estates. Neighbors began emerging from their homes like it was a parade. Phones out, recording. Victoria stood at the curb, pointing at my house like I was harboring fugitives. 2 officers approached. One older, composed, one younger, clearly trying not to smile. "Afternoon," the older one said. "We got a call about Wi-Fi?" Victoria rushed forward. "He disabled our camera grid," she said dramatically. "The entire security system collapsed when he altered his router settings." The younger officer raised an eyebrow. "Sir," the older one said to me, "did you change your Wi-Fi password?" "Yes." "And that's it?" "Yes," Victoria interjected. "He cut off community surveillance." I looked at the officer. They were using my private internet without consent. The officers exchanged a look. "Ma'am," the older officer said carefully, "do you have written permission from this resident to use his network?" "It's implied by residency," she said. "It's not," I replied. The younger officer asked, "Can we see the router logs?" "Of course," I said, stepping aside. They followed me into my home office. I pulled up the dashboard. The older officer leaned in. His expression changed. "Well, that's interesting." "What?" I asked. He pointed at the screen. Repeated connection attempts from MR Clubhouse Admin, MR Clubhouse Servers 01, MR Remote Cam Control All being denied. "The timestamps were from the last 10 minutes. They're still trying to access your network," he said quietly. The younger officer whistled. "That's not good," I crossed my arms. So I wasn't paranoid. The older officer straightened up. "Sir, would you be willing to accompany us to the HOA clubhouse?" Victoria, who had been hovering in the doorway, stiffened. "That's unnecessary," she said quickly. The officer looked at her. "If there's unauthorized access happening from that location, it's very necessary." Her composure cracked for just a second. Outside, the neighborhood crowd had doubled. When we walked toward the clubhouse, phones followed us like we were celebrities. Victoria marched ahead, still trying to regain control. "You're making a mistake," she muttered. "This is internal HOA business." "No," the officer said calmly. "It's potentially criminal." The clubhouse looked pristine on the outside. Fresh paint, landscaping immaculate. Inside, it smelled like disinfectant and fake lemon. She tried to block a door labeled maintenance. The officer presented a warrant request through dispatch. Given the active network evidence, they didn't need much. Within the hour, they were inside. And that's when everything changed. Behind that locked door was not cleaning equipment. It was a server room. Multiple monitors mounted on the wall, cables running across the floor like veins. And on those screens, live camera feeds, front yards, driveways, back patios, windows. One monitor zoomed in on someone's kitchen. Another showed a backyard pool. Another, my backyard. My chest went tight. The older officer turned slowly toward Victoria. "Explain." "It's for safety," she whispered. "Inside homes?" he snapped. She stammered. "Only if their devices auto-synced." "Auto-synced to what?" I demanded. She said nothing. The younger officer moved to a central console. "Sir," he called to his partner, "traffic routing logs." The older officer joined him. Then he looked at me. "They've been routing everything through your IP address." My blood went cold. "She used your network as a mask," he said quietly. Victoria's silence was confirmation. The room felt smaller. Neighbors had been recorded, monitored, cataloged, and I had unknowingly been the digital shield hiding it. Outside, word spread fast. Within 30 minutes, news vans arrived. Someone had live-streamed the entire thing. Victoria was escorted out of the clubhouse in handcuffs. She didn't look furious anymore. She looked exposed. As she passed me, she leaned in and whispered, "You destroyed everything." I looked her straight in the eye. "No," I said. "You did." And as the patrol car door shut behind her, the neighborhood that once feared her stood in stunned silence. That was the day Maple Ridge Estates stopped being quiet, and the day I realized this wasn't just about Wi-Fi. It was about power, and we had only just uncovered the surface. By the next morning, Maple Ridge Estates didn't look like a quiet suburban neighborhood anymore. It looked like a crime scene. Yellow tape wrapped around the clubhouse entrance. 2 county vehicles parked near the artificial lake. A small crowd, gathered in clusters, whispering, pretending not to stare. News vans lined the main road like we were hosting some kind of suburban scandal festival. And at the center of it all, a locked server room that had been quietly watching everyone for months. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those monitors again. The grid of live feeds, my backyard, my patio, the reflection in my own window. The worst part wasn't the cameras. It was the thought that someone had been watching, taking notes, judging. I was pouring coffee when my phone rang. Unknown number. I hesitated, then answered. Daniel Reed? Yes. This is Detective Morgan with the County Cybercrimes Division. We spoke briefly yesterday. We need you to come down to the clubhouse. There's something you should see. Something in her tone made my stomach tighten. When I stepped outside, the air felt different. Heavy. Like the neighborhood itself knew it had been exposed. A few neighbors nodded at me. Not the tight HOA-approved smiles I'd seen before. These were real. Grateful. Shocked. I walked to the clubhouse. Inside, it no longer looked pristine. Officers were cataloging equipment. Hard drives were stacked in evidence bags. Ethernet cables unplugged and hanging loose like veins cut open. Detective Morgan stood near the server rack. Early 40s. Calm. Focused. The kind of person who had seen too much digital ugliness to be surprised anymore. You weren't exaggerating.